The message came without warning, but when it arrived, the world fell silent. Earth had received its first communication from beyond our galaxy, and it wasn't a plea for peace or a call to arms. No, it was a single, chilling message. Do not harm our allies. Those words rang through every corner of the earth, from the highest government halls to the quietest corners of every home. No one knew who had sent it or why, but one thing was clear. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. For centuries, humanity had looked up at the stars, wondering if we were truly alone. We sent out our probes, hoping to make contact with something, anything, out there. Yet, we never expected this. We never expected that the first true alien encounter would come not with the curiosity of a distant civilization, but with a demand. It all started when we made contact with the Tormari, the aliens who had long been a secret among the highest echelons of human society. They had been living among us, hidden in plain sight, their reasons for staying in the shadows unknown. In the early years, the Tormari helped us in subtle ways, providing technology, offering guidance in our darkest hours, but always from the background. They were not conquerors or invaders, they were our allies, though we never fully understood why. Their kind had their own stories of oppression, and for reasons we couldn't comprehend, they trusted humanity to protect them. But trust, as we all know, is fragile, and humans have a history of breaking it. Then came the incident. A group of military scientists, eager to advance their own knowledge, began experimenting on a Tormari. They thought they could study their biology, unlock their secrets, and maybe even weaponize their technology. But they didn't realize what they were dealing with. The Tormari, despite their peaceful nature, were not helpless. They had been waiting for the right moment to reveal the true extent of their power, and the moment humanity crossed the line, they struck back. The consequences were swift and brutal. Though none of us truly understood the full scale of what had just been unleashed, the message that followed was as direct as it was terrifying. Do not harm our allies. It wasn't just a threat against those who had attacked the Tormari. It was a warning to all of humanity, and as it echoed across the globe, the ramifications were clear. Any further aggression against the Tormari would result in dire consequences. But what did this mean for us? Were we truly capable of understanding the depth of the Tormari's power? Or had we just awoken a force beyond our wildest imaginations? The world was on edge. Governments scrambled to assess the situation, but no one had answers. The Tormari had left no traces of their true capabilities, and even their allies on Earth had little more than speculation to offer. Some insisted the warning was a bluff, but the ones who had seen the aftermath of the attack knew better. There was no bluffing about something like this. But as the days passed, something more troubling began to emerge. It wasn't just the Tormari who were watching. Something larger, something even more ancient was taking notice. The quiet whispers among the highest circles of power began to grow louder. Was Earth truly prepared to stand up to a galactic alliance? Or had we just made a choice we couldn't take back? And then, the final message arrived. No more warnings, just a simple, terrifying ultimatum. Make your choice, humans. Choose wisely. The clock was ticking, and the world was holding its breath. What did it all mean? Who were these allies of the Tormari, and what was their true purpose? Were we about to face a war we weren't ready for, or was there still a way out? The tension was unbearable. As the story unfolds, one thing is certain. Humanity's next move could either save us or doom us all. In the days following the chilling ultimatum, the world became a different place. Nations that once rivaled each other set aside their differences, at least on the surface, in a frantic attempt to understand the magnitude of the Tormari's warning. They tried to piece together the fragments of information they had about the Tormari themselves, their origins, their capabilities. But no one had answers. The truth was, humanity had been blind to the larger picture, oblivious to the fact that the Tormari weren't the only ones watching us. The Tormari were just the messengers, and the real players had yet to reveal themselves. The tension was palpable. In every corner of the globe, people were beginning to question everything they knew about the universe. The old conspiracies about alien encounters, once laughed off as fanciful fiction, now seemed like mere hints at a much deeper truth. But what could humanity do now? Could we truly understand the forces at play here? Or were we simply at the mercy of powers far beyond our comprehension? Among the few who had known the Tormari's true nature was Dr. Eleanor Vaughan, a respected scientist who had worked in the shadow of classified government programs for decades. She had been one of the first to encounter the Tormari when they had arrived on Earth, and she had come to respect them for their wisdom and restraint. But even she was uncertain of their motives. Her research had uncovered fragments of their history, clues to their past, but nothing that could explain why they had chosen humanity as their protectors. Or perhaps, as the message hinted, their allies. Dr. Vaughan was summoned to the United Nations, where representatives from every major country sat in tense silence. They all knew the stakes, but no one had a solution. The general consensus was that the Tormari were a powerful race, but what was their connection to the broader galactic community? What made them so important that they were able to make such an ultimatum? Could humanity even survive an alliance or a war against such forces? As Dr. Vaughan sat before the council, the weight of the situation seemed to settle on her shoulders. She had spent years in contact with the Tormari, but now she felt like a stranger in their presence. There was a growing fear, not of the Tormari themselves, but of what lay beyond them. The warning wasn't just about Earth. It was a message to all of humanity that there were forces out there who would not hesitate to act if we crossed a line. And what was worse, what terrified Dr. Vaughan most, was the thought that we might have already crossed it. The Tormari's message had been delivered with such precision, such finality, that it left no room for negotiation. It wasn't a conversation, it was a decree, yet no one knew who they were speaking for or to. The Tormari had been silent on the true nature of their allies. Could these mysterious figures be their own kind? Or was there a larger galactic network that had been watching us for much longer than we realized? Dr. Vaughan's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. She had no answers, only more questions. Meanwhile, on the streets of major cities, people were beginning to panic. Some believed that the Tormari would come for retribution, while others wondered if the ultimatum was simply the first step in something far more devastating. The media, once a source of hope and entertainment, now became a constant reminder of the uncertainty. Governments scrambled to create plans, trying to assess whether they should fight back or submit. But how could they fight an enemy they couldn't understand? In secret, military forces began to prepare. They didn't know who or what they were preparing for, but they knew that whatever the Tormari had warned about was something humanity had never encountered before. There were whispers of alien technology hidden deep within Earth's military complexes, fragments of ancient, long-forgotten alien artifacts that were now being studied more closely than ever. Some said the Tormari had left them for humanity to discover. Others thought they were simply remnants of another civilization, long lost to time. Either way, it was clear that these technologies might be humanity's only hope. Dr. Vaughan had one more piece of the puzzle, a memory, hazy and unclear. During her time working with the Tormari, she had overheard fragments of a conversation, a warning whispered among their leaders. She could never quite understand it, but the words echoed in her mind. There are those who will come for them. We cannot protect them all. Who were they referring to? The aliens who had helped humanity for so long? Or someone much worse? In the stillness of her office, Dr. Vaughan stared at the message once more. The words flashing on her screen, "Do not harm our allies." The message was clear, but the questions it raised were anything but. Who were these allies, and what would happen if humanity didn't heed the warning? The clock was ticking, and the answers were slipping further from reach. As the world grappled with the unknown, the tension between governments and civilians continued to rise. For many, it felt as if Earth was on the edge of an abyss, and no one knew which way it would fall. In quiet, dimly lit rooms, the leaders of nations tried to decipher the Tormari's warning, but there were no answers, just more uncertainty. For some, it was an opportunity to seize power in the chaos. Others were desperate to preserve peace, terrified of the consequences if Earth made the wrong move. Yet, in every meeting, one thing was clear. The message had struck fear into the heart of every decision-maker. While political leaders argued behind closed doors, the general population began to fracture. On the streets, protests erupted, with some chanting for action, demanding humanity take a stand and assert its strength, even if it meant defying the Tormari. They believed that the galaxy would respect humanity's will. Others, however, clung to the hope that appeasing the Tormari would prevent a catastrophe. Fearing the unknown, rumors of Tormari sightings began to circulate, each story more fantastical than the last, with some claiming they had seen them in plain sight, blending seamlessly with humans. The suspicion and paranoia grew, and soon, distrust had infiltrated every corner of society. Who was an ally? Who could be trusted? It was hard to know who was human and who might be something far more dangerous. In the midst of this turmoil, Dr. Vaughn's research into the Tormari had begun to lead her down a darker path. She had always believed that the Tormari were a noble, peaceful race, but the deeper she dug, the more unsettling the discoveries became. Ancient texts, long hidden away, suggested that the Tormari had not always been benevolent. They had a history of war and conquest, though it was unclear whether this was their past or a part of their forgotten history. Her intuition told her that they were hiding something from humanity, something they had not shared even with their closest allies. Was this a betrayal of trust, or a greater, unspoken alliance? Was humanity a pawn in a larger, more complex scheme? One night, after hours of studying old records and encrypted transmissions, Dr. Vaughn found something that made her blood run cold. There were references to an ancient galactic order, one that had been at war for millennia, a war that had nearly torn the universe apart, and the Tormari had been central to that conflict. But why would they protect humanity if they had once been warriors in such a brutal struggle? Had they changed? Or was there something more sinister behind their actions? Dr. Vaughn's mind raced as she considered the possibility that humanity might be caught in the crossfire of an ancient war, a war that had never truly ended and was now being reignited. Meanwhile, the military had begun to develop its own plans. Though they had no clear target, their instincts told them that the Tormari weren't the only threat in the galaxy. Earth had been thrust into a dangerous new era, and the military brass was determined to prepare for any eventuality. The secret research into alien technology, which had been an afterthought in previous years, was now their main focus. They had made progress, but at a pace that felt like it would never be fast enough. Officers in top-secret bases began to form alliances with civilian scientists, pooling knowledge to decipher the mysteries of the alien artifacts scattered across the globe. But their work was plagued by setbacks, strange malfunctions, and unexplainable phenomena. Some even whispered that the artifacts were alive. Others spoke of impossible visions, memories not their own, flooding their minds. It was clear they were dealing with something beyond human understanding. Across the ocean, a group of rogue scientists and conspiracy theorists had begun to take matters into their own hands. These individuals, who had long suspected that Earth was being manipulated by extraterrestrial forces, now saw the Tormari's warning as confirmation of their worst fears. They believed that humanity had been manipulated into a position of weakness, under the control of the Tormari and their mysterious allies. These rogue factions began to gather evidence, claiming that the Tormari's peaceful nature was a facade, a carefully constructed lie. Some even went so far as to say that the Tormari were preparing Earth for some larger, darker purpose, using their influence to mold humanity into a subservient race for the greater good of their galactic masters. But who were they to believe? Could the Tormari really be deceiving humanity? Or were these radicals simply blinded by their fear of the unknown? As these various factions continued to spin their theories and devise plans, Dr. Vaughn found herself caught in the middle. Her growing unease about the Tormari's true intentions had left her conflicted. She had always believed in their cause, but now she wondered if she had been wrong. Should she warn the world about the dangers of trusting them? Or should she continue to work in secret to uncover the truth behind their alliance with humanity? The lines between ally and enemy were becoming increasingly blurred, and she knew that her next steps could determine the fate of billions. Then, a chilling new development made everything even more uncertain. Reports began to surface from deep space observatories. Massive, seemingly endless fleets of ships were headed toward Earth, and they weren't Tomari ships. These were alien vessels from an unknown civilization, and their intentions unknown. The countdown had begun, and soon the final decision would have to be made. Would humanity align itself with the Tomari's mysterious allies, or would it face the wrath of an even greater force, one that might destroy everything in its path? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, and the clock continued to tick. As the days passed, the weight of the situation grew heavier. The threat of the unknown fleet drew closer, and Dr. Vaughn's worst fears seemed to be coming true. The fleet, now identified as the Vrelor, a race that had been wiped out centuries ago in the galactic war the Tomari had hidden from humanity, was fast approaching Earth. The Vrelor were known for their ruthless campaigns of destruction, and their return meant something far worse than any of them had anticipated. According to the encrypted data that Dr. Vaughn had uncovered, the Tomari had once fought alongside the Vrelor, but a terrible betrayal had shattered their alliance. The Tomari had turned against them and in doing so had nearly triggered the annihilation of both races, but now it seemed the Vrelor had not forgotten their ancient grudge. The Tomari's warning, once seen as a simple gesture of caution, now seemed like a desperate plea. They had been hiding the truth all along. The Vrelor had not disappeared. They had been biding their time, waiting for the moment to strike, and that moment had come. With the Vrelor fleet nearing, there was no time left for diplomacy, no time left for negotiation. Dr. Vaughn knew that the Tomari could no longer protect humanity. They had to act, and quickly. In the heart of the UN headquarters, the leaders were losing their grip on the situation. Debates raged about whether to surrender, whether to negotiate with the Vrelor, or whether humanity should unite under a single banner and prepare for war. There were those who believed the Tomari were the key to survival, that their centuries of peace were proof of their loyalty. But there were others, more vocal now, who believed that the Tomari's involvement in this galactic war had never ended, that they had only ever been waiting for humanity to fall into their grasp, to soften us up for their old allies' return. The divide between the factions had never been greater, and time was running out. Meanwhile, in hidden underground bunkers, military leaders were preparing for the worst. The research into alien technology had reached a critical stage, and their plans were taking shape. But what could humanity hope to achieve against an ancient and nearly invincible enemy? The Tomari, despite their advanced technology, had never fought a full-scale war. They were not prepared for the sheer magnitude of the Vrelor's power. Earth had always been a peaceful planet, its military strength reliant on its allies, aliens whose loyalty was now uncertain. Outside the halls of power, fear was spreading like wildfire. People could sense that something was coming, something that they couldn't fight, couldn't understand. Cities had begun to evacuate, and mass hysteria was taking hold of populations. The once hopeful unity among Earth's nations was beginning to unravel. It was as if the very fabric of human civilization was coming apart, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them all. But amid all this chaos, there was one thing no one had expected. The Tomari had gone silent. Their communication networks, once active and accessible, had suddenly gone dark. Dr. Vaughn had tried reaching out, sending encrypted messages, but there was no response. Had the Tomari abandoned humanity, or was there something more sinister at play? Had the Vrelor already made their move? The uncertainty was maddening. The clock was ticking. As Dr. Vaughn continued to pore over the data, a breakthrough finally came. A hidden transmission buried deep within the Tomari archives revealed a final message, a desperate attempt at communication that had never been sent. The message was addressed to humanity, but it wasn't a warning. It was a plea for help. The Tormari had known the Vrelor were coming, but they had no way of stopping them. Their only hope was to awaken the ancient defense systems, relics from the galactic war that could turn the tide. The problem was, these systems were dormant, scattered across the galaxy, and it was unclear whether they could even be reactivated. In a frantic, final attempt to salvage what little time they had left, Draugr Vaughn began working with the military to track down these systems, but they knew it was a race against time. The Vrelor fleet was already within range, and their first strike would be devastating. There was no time for hesitation. The fate of humanity depended on activating these ancient systems before the Vrelor descended upon Earth. Just as the situation seemed unbearable, a new signal was detected. It was a Tormari transmission, faint but unmistakable. Dr. Vaughn's heart raced as she worked to decode it. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. Prepare for the final decision. There is no turning back. The final moments of humanity's struggle had arrived. The Vrelor were mere hours away from their strike, and the ancient systems were still dormant. In the distance, Earth's military gathered its forces, unsure if they would survive the coming battle. And as Dr. Vaughn looked out across the world's chaos, she realized that the only hope humanity had left was not in the hands of the Tormari or the military, but in a single desperate gamble to awaken the forgotten weapons that could turn the tide. The stakes had never been higher, but would it be enough to stop the Vrelor? Or had humanity already lost the fight? The countdown to destruction was nearing its end. As Dr. Vaughn scrambled to decode the Tormari transmission, her thoughts were scattered, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The last message, prepare for the final decision, there is no turning back, echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. She had thought the message was simply a final ominous warning, perhaps a confirmation of the war that was about to come. But as the transmission continued to play, there was something more. Hidden deep within the cryptic code, she caught a word she hadn't expected to see. Betrayal. For a moment she froze, heart racing. She replayed the transmission, her hands shaking as she rewound it. There it was again, buried in the garbled data. A single, unmistakable word. Betrayal. The Tormari weren't just warning humanity. They were warning someone else. But who? Who was the true target of the warning? It couldn't be the Vrelor, could it? They had been the Tormari's enemies for centuries, their ancient war an open wound in the galaxy. But this didn't feel like a simple conflict between two races. The Tormari were hiding something far darker, something far more complex. Desperation and confusion gripped her as she attempted to analyze the rest of the data. In that moment, her mind pieced together the fragments of the puzzle that had been swirling around her. The Tormari's silence, their cryptic warnings, and their refusal to provide clarity. It wasn't just about the Vrelor. It was about something far more dangerous. Something that the Tormari had kept hidden from humanity all along. The ancient defense systems they had hoped to activate? They weren't just relics of a past war, they were part of something larger, something that the Tormari feared. Just as she was on the verge of a breakthrough, a chilling new transmission came through. This one from an unknown source, unmistakably human. The message was brief but urgent. The Tormari aren't the only ones who've been hiding things. The transmission was cut off abruptly, but Dr. Vaughn's instincts told her this wasn't a coincidence. Someone was trying to warn her, but who? And more importantly, why hadn't they been able to send the message through normal channels? Her heart sank as she realized the stakes were much higher than she had ever imagined. The Tormari had never been the true protectors of humanity. They had been watching, waiting, playing a far more complicated game. The mysterious allies they had warned about weren't their friends. They were part of a hidden network of galactic powers, each with their own agenda. And humanity? We had become a pawn in a game that we hadn't even known existed. Frantic, Dr. Vaughn contacted the UN, demanding answers. But what she received wasn't the reassurance she had hoped for. The message she had just decoded wasn't just for humanity. It was for the Vreller as well. The Tormari had used humanity's supposed alliance with them as a bait, a trap. Earth's involvement in this galactic conflict wasn't about survival, it was about leverage, and the Vrellor were the bait. The world teetered on the edge of collapse as she processed the new revelation. The ancient defense systems were now seen in a different light. They were never meant to defend Earth. They were a key to a much larger plan, a plan that would involve all of humanity being used as part of a galactic negotiation. In her gut, she knew what the final decision meant. The Tormari were going to sacrifice Earth, using its destruction to negotiate with the Vrellor. The alliances they had formed with the ancient galactic powers were built on lies, and humanity was caught in the middle. Now, as Dr. Vaughn scrambled to warn her colleagues, a shocking realization hit her. The Vrellor fleet was not just coming for Earth. They were coming for the Tormari, and the Tormari knew it. The betrayal was mutual. Humanity, caught between two warring factions, was the real target, and there was no way out. Every step they had taken, every decision made, had led them to this point. Humanity was now the pawn in a galactic game too large for them to fully comprehend. Time was running out. The Vrellor were getting closer, and the Tormari had no intention of stopping them. Worse yet, their silence suggested a hidden agenda, one that Dr. Vaughn couldn't yet grasp. Was this truly the end for humanity? Or was there a way to turn the tide before it was too late? In a final, desperate move, Dr. Vaughn reached out to the military once again, urging them to prepare for an entirely new strategy, one that didn't rely on the Tormari's defense systems or their mysterious allies. But as she spoke, something strange happened. The signal went dark. Communication lines were severed. And then the most terrifying possibility surfaced. Someone, somewhere, didn't want her to warn the world, and if that was the case, who could she trust now? Was humanity's fate truly in their own hands, or had they already been sealed? The stage was set, and the final decision was almost upon them. The tension that had been building for weeks finally reached its breaking point. The Vrellor fleet was in the atmosphere, their immense warships blotting out the sky like ominous shadows. The world held its breath. Governments and military leaders had scrambled to launch a desperate counteroffensive, but they knew it would never be enough. No weapon, no strategy could match the overwhelming force bearing down on Earth. The Tormari, silent as ever, had not responded to any of the communications sent their way. It was as if they had abandoned humanity to face the coming storm alone. Dr. Vaughn sat in front of her screen, her heart pounding as she watched the final countdown to impact. The Vrellor were moments away from attacking. In a last-ditch effort, she had managed to access one final Tormari transmission, one that had been buried beneath layers of encrypted data. It contained the key to the ancient defense systems. But as she studied the code, something in the back of her mind nagged at her, an unsettling feeling that she couldn't shake. She had been so focused on the Tormari's betrayal that she had missed something crucial. Something about the transmission felt off. She began to connect the dots. The Tormari had never truly been the allies they had presented themselves to be, but neither were they the sole masterminds of the galactic game they had drawn humanity into. There was someone else, a third party that had been manipulating both the Tormari and the Vrellor, and now they were ready to strike. Dr. Vaughn's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. The Tormari had never been the enemy. They had been the unwitting pawns in a far more intricate plot, and the Vrellor, though deadly, were also victims. The real enemy, the true power behind the galactic war, was not any alien race. It was humanity itself. She had seen it now. The ancient defense systems, the ones meant to protect Earth, were not designed to keep the Vrellor out. They were meant to ensure humanity's dominance. The Tormari had been protecting Earth all along, but the system's true purpose had always been to elevate humanity to a position of power in the galaxy. And now, as the fleets descended upon Earth, it was clear humanity had been given a choice, but had never known the full weight of that decision. With the Vrelor preparing to launch their assault, Dr. Vaughn made a decision that would change everything. She reached out, not to the military, but to the Tormari. She had to make them understand. The Tormari weren't just here to protect humanity. They had been protecting humanity from itself. The decision wasn't whether Earth would survive the Vrelor attack. It was whether Earth would be allowed to continue its role in the galactic game. As she sent the final message, hoping against hope that it would reach the Tormari, something unexpected happened. A massive shock wave of energy rippled through the atmosphere, followed by a silence so deep it was suffocating. And then, all at once, the Vrelor fleet ceased its advance. The screen in front of Dr. Vaughn flickered and the message from the Tormari came through, clear and unmistakable. The final decision has been made. The Tormari had turned the tide, but not in the way humanity had hoped. Earth had been given a choice: rise as a galactic power or face extinction. The Vrelor had known this all along. They hadn't come to destroy Earth. They had come to ensure that humanity did not ascend. And now, Earth's fate hung in the balance. Dr. Vaughn's mind raced as the implications of the Tormari's words sank in. Humanity was at the crossroads of something far greater than war. The Vrelor had only been the beginning. The Tormari had been preparing Earth for something much larger, a galactic shift that would place humanity at the heart of an intergalactic power struggle. But that power came at a cost. Humanity had to prove it was worthy, that it could handle the responsibility of wielding such immense influence. As the Tormari ships began to leave Earth's atmosphere, their warning clear, Dr. Vaughn understood what had to be done. The Vrelor had been the first test. The real battle, the true conflict, had only just begun. And humanity's fate, whether it would rise or fall, rested entirely on the choices they made next. But just as she prepared to share her newfound knowledge with the world, an alarming new message blinked onto her screen. It was from an entirely unknown source, one that sent a chill down her spine. The message was simple. The final decision is not yours to make. Dr. Vaughn's breath caught in her throat as the screen blacked out, leaving her with the unsettling knowledge that whatever had begun, whatever game had been set into motion, was far from over. The true power behind the galactic conflict remained hidden in the shadows, and humanity, caught in the middle, was about to face a new, far more dangerous reality. The screen flickered again, and Dr. Vaughn stared at the blank space where the message had disappeared. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to re-establish the connection, but no matter what she did, the transmission was lost. The tension in the air was suffocating, the silence from the outside world deafening. The Vrelor fleet, which had been moments away from unleashing destruction, had paused, almost as if they too had realized that something was amiss. And now, the final message hung in the air like an unresolved chord, leaving more questions than answers. A deep sense of unease settled over her as she turned her attention back to the Tormari message. The final decision is not yours to make. What did it mean? And who had sent the message? The unknown source, whoever they were, had disrupted the course of everything she thought she knew. The stakes had shifted in a way that left her feeling exposed, vulnerable. She could no longer trust that humanity's fight for survival was the ultimate objective. And then, just as she was about to fall into despair, something extraordinary happened. The Tormari ships, which had been hovering above Earth's atmosphere, suddenly emitted a burst of light. For a brief moment, the air around them seemed to shimmer with energy. Dr. Vaughn's breath caught in her throat as the ships began to descend, their forms now unmistakably clear. It was not a retreat. The Tormari were not abandoning Earth. They were preparing to make a final stand. The ground trembled beneath her feet as massive structures emerged from the Earth's surface, hidden underground for centuries, now activated by the Tormari's arrival. The ancient defense systems had been awakened, not by human hands, but by the Tormari themselves. Dr. Vaughn finally understood. The Tormari had never intended to hand over control of these systems to humanity. They had always been meant to safeguard Earth, but only under their watchful eye. Humanity had been the pawns, and the Tormari had been the true protectors all along. But now, a new realization dawned on her. The Vrelor fleet wasn't just a threat to Earth. They were the last remnants of an ancient race that had once sought to conquer the galaxy, and their invasion was merely the beginning of something far larger. The Tormari were not just defending Earth, they were preparing for a cosmic war, one that humanity was now caught in the middle of. The Vrelor had known about Earth's role in this struggle for centuries, and the final decision had never been humanity's to make. It was a cosmic reckoning, one that would determine the fate of entire galaxies. The Tormari's arrival and their activation of the defense systems signaled the beginning of a new era. The Vrelor were not merely invading, they were trying to prevent a galactic alliance from rising, an alliance that Earth was unwittingly tied to. But as Dr. Vaughn watched the incredible sight unfold before her, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. Humanity, despite everything, had been manipulated into playing its part. The true power behind this galactic struggle was far older, far more complex than anything humanity had imagined. Dr. Vaughn quickly alerted the UN and the military, urging them to prepare for what was to come. But she knew the truth now. The battle for Earth was no longer about simple survival. It was about choosing which side humanity would stand with in the coming war. The Tormari were not just allies, they were guardians. And the Vrelor were but one piece of a much larger puzzle. As the sky above Earth began to glow with the intensity of the alien ship's power, Dr. Vaughn realized that the world would never be the same again. Humanity had always believed itself to be the center of the universe, the pinnacle of civilization, but the reality was far more humbling. Earth was merely one small piece of a much larger cosmic game, and humanity had been drawn into it whether they were ready or not. The final resolution wasn't one of victory or defeat. It was the recognition that Earth's place in the universe had just shifted forever. The Vrelor, the Tormari, and the mysterious force lurking behind them were all players in a galactic struggle that humanity could no longer ignore. Dr. Vaughn watched as the ships made their final approach, and with a sense of profound realization she knew that humanity had no choice but to rise to the challenge. The story ended not with a clear conclusion, but with an opening. A new chapter in the galactic saga had begun, and humanity, for better or worse, would play a crucial role. The final decision had been made, but the consequences were only just starting to unfold. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Earth's destiny was no longer in its own hands. And for the first time, humanity would have to face the vast unknown of the cosmos, unsure of what it would find, but knowing that it would never be the same.